Hi, everybody. This is Amber Rana again from AM Rana Ventures, and welcome to Know Your Kanoon. And continuing our live sessions, we are deeply engaging the team at Green and Spiegel, and we are bringing you every week, I would say, a new episode. And on the lives, bi-weekly, we're getting you new stuff which will help potential immigrants solve their queries, including students, as to what is happening. So today on this particular episode of Know Your Kanoon, I have two interesting people who will be addressing the students and their problems because we've been getting a lot of queries on them. So I have Miss Sonia Sidhu with me and Peter Solano. They both are from Green and Spiegel. Peter and Sonia, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for sparing your time and being on this dubious show that we call Know Your Kanun, where you get to know about your laws. And we've had a wonderful experience with all of your associates, and I hope you have the same today with us. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yep. So guys, today's session is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to talk about the students, right? There's been a couple of updates, and I'm very, very excited about those as well because I look forward to some update coming from Canada because it's good news generally in terms of immigrants getting out of this pandemic zone, getting out of the COVID situation. So can we have the breaking news from you guys' side that where the students and possibly other applicants can just go and check out their applications?
Yeah, sure. So, today we had opening up some quarantine restrictions. So if you are double vaccinated and you want to come to Canada, you don't have to be a citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. It's anybody that's double vaccinated is able to come to Canada as long as they are part of an exemption group. So they are allowed to travel. So it's not just a free for all. If you just want to come visit Canada now, you can come if you're vaccinated. You still have to fall under people that are allowed to enter. For example, you're a spouse of a Canadian citizen or your extended family member, immediate family member. You have to be double vaccinated. And it's just to quarantine that you don't have to stay at the hotel quarantines or you don't have to do the 8-day testing. You still have to provide the testing prior to getting on the plane and have to have a negative test when you land. And you still have to have a quarantine plan just in case you test positive once you land. Your vaccines do have to be done 14 days prior to your travel. So they can't just, you got vaccinated today and tomorrow you can now travel to Canada. You have to have given that 14 days to get the whole immunity built up into your system before you travel. Basically it's relatively the same except for the quarantine section of it. But we know there's a lot of students or workers that have the permits in India that are currently stuck there. And Peter can touch base on how they can come to Canada at this point.
Peter, your take on this?
Sure. Yeah. So the rules that are currently in place restrict travel to Canada until the 21st of July. And these rules for foreign nationals entering from outside of the United States, any country outside of the United States, they're being renewed on a monthly basis. So the extension we're expecting is likely to take place on July 21st. So if you have an approval letter from a school in Canada, you would be exempted from the travel restrictions. And then, as Sonia was saying, hopefully the loosening of the quarantine restrictions would apply to you, and you wouldn't have to go through the hotel quarantine requirement that has been in effect recently.
So that's really good news because then, guys, you save up on the hotel food. You also get great food back home. And also you end up saving those $2,000, which you were all scared about. So that's great news overall, but still a lot of precautions in place. And I think that's how the pandemic can be controlled. So I don't blame the immigration. It's us who have to be blamed for this. So guys, please take all those precautions. Guys, I want to come to the main agenda now. And the main agenda being the student immigration overall in 2021 and 2020, wherein, so many people enrolled with the different courses. Everybody was, and Canada is huge in terms of education, right? Every third individual, somewhat, if you don't qualify for your permanent residency, the best way is to get enlisted legally into a course, get your work permit, and then maybe look at converting it into a permanent residency after giving that work expire side. What has been the trend, and what can I say to potential applicants, with all these things opening up? How fast has the processing been? What can we expect? What can students expect possibly in this scenario?
So Amber, I'll comment on that. So study permit applications that were filed prior to, I believe it was May 15, The government has said that they would process the applications well in advance of September. It wasn't guaranteed, but the government of Canada said we're going to do our very best to give students who are being approved these applications advance time to travel to Canada and prepare themselves. So if students are now filing applications in advance of fall 2021, I think that it's possible, but it's also quite possible that the processing goes beyond, especially in light of the backlog of applications in India. So the recommendation would be to file the applications as soon as possible, but of course doing so in a diligent way. So making sure all the necessary components of the applications are included in the application, but filing it as quickly as possible.
Right, because most of the students that have been inquiring, at least, and inquiries, people writing to us on mail, and I've heard this, they're saying that some of the colleges are delaying their intake for the September batch and stuff like this. So I'm sure there are a lot of eager people, but students who have been approved, I would suggest that get your documents in place, as Peter is saying and Sonia was mentioning, get your vaccinations in place and move forward. Now, Peter, we'll come to the most important aspect, which is, I always talk about agents in all my podcasts, and Stephen's been like, why do you keep talking about these guys all the while? We've covered them. I said, no, it's not enough for people to know. And I come from a state called Haryana, Punjab, bordering that, right? So the most of the applicants that I see from that side of the country, and then of course rest of India, they all approach to these so-called agents, right? Some of them are registered, some of them are not registered. And I'm not going to talk about the PR side of things, but I'm going to talk about student visas, right? How are they even equipped to help? I mean, people have started a business saying that, hey, I've got to tie up with the college, I'll sort you out, your application is covered in this amount, and I'll get you through. Can you just throw some light on this, that how illegal all of this is? Because I think getting it done through a lawyer also requires some precision in terms of documentation, correct? So let's throw some light on that and what can be done about it.
Well, I think it's really important to remember that, sometimes people think a study permit application is a simple application. You include the letter from the school saying we've accepted you, and that's it. That's sometimes the perception that I see when speaking with clients. But in reality, this is a very detail-oriented application. It requires a lot of specifics. You need to have properly filled out the application forms. And the information in the forms and in all of the documents is going to be carefully scrutinized by the officers to see if, number one, you are a genuine temporary resident, and number two, if you are a bona fide student that is going to actively pursue their studies in Canada. So the desire to submit the application quickly and perhaps hire an agent is understandable from that sense, but when you actually consider the importance of this application and the rest of your life and in the immigration process and traveling to Canada, it's very, very important that you have someone representing you who is aware of all the different criteria, who has the proper training, and is going to help you and truly help you with all of the different components. The potential consequences to filing an application with inaccurate or incomplete or fraudulent documents is very, very, there are steep penalties, most notably the misrepresentation finding, which we can perhaps discuss later on in this conversation. But, there would be a 5-year penalty on you applying to Canada again if you're found to have misrepresented. And just oftentimes we see clients come to us and the misrepresentation finding has been made, and there is very little that we can do at that point in time if the misrepresentation finding has been made, and we can't appeal that misrepresentation finding further.
Yeah, Amber, what I always tell students, and it's a very typical thing out of India, everybody wants to do things quickly. Oh, so-and-so went, we will need to go, right? And these parents are selling off their land or leasing it out to get their students across, but you have to do your research. are these schools qualified to even get you work permits afterwards?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
How long is there work permit going to be for? Is it going to be for a year? Are you going to get the experience to get to PR, right? It's not just a matter of getting a study permit. I always tell students, like, you're laying the foundation for your rest of your life. So if you don't have a strong foundation, you're not building a house and getting PR to Canada if you don't do this correctly now. Right?
Correct.
So and it's human nature. We like to rush, or so-and-so got it, or this or that. And then mistakes are made, and those mistakes to rectify, like Peter said, are very hard sometimes. And sometimes you just can't rectify them.
No, and rightly put by you guys. I'll bring an instance, like as you said, people put up, they get mortgages, they sell off their lands, and they're just willing to send students across and their kids across. And in that process, I'm going to talk about this work permit, and people don't realize the designated learning institute concept at all. People are looking for just getting into, any college that is there. What do you suggest to people? Like, I have a bunch of clients, I would say, or not clients, I would say people who've referred to me, and I had spoken to Stephen Green about this, that he could help them, maybe with this, that some agents got them into some private colleges, which were not designated learning institutes. And then they did their studies. And when they were applying for work permits, they were all denied that by IRCC. And then they were in a dispute. And they contested before the bodies, saying that they could not get the work permits, but it's not their mistake because it was an honest mistake of fact. But law is law, right? It's equal for everybody. What does one do in such a situation, Sonia or Peter? What do you recommend to such students who are stuck overseas? Is there something that can be done about these applications?
Research. You need to do your own research, right? If you are going to shoot yourself in the foot, you are shooting yourself in the foot, right? The only person that can help you is you, right? So if you're going to hire someone, research them, look at who they are. The designated learning institutions are listed on the immigration website.
Correct.
Call the schools, right? Do your research. Like, you can pick up and call the schools and say, hey, can I get a work permit? And these schools are also posting on their websites. And if I can get a work permit, this program, how long of a work permit does it give me? Is 1 year enough for me to say I have Canadian work experience, I can apply for PR and stay in Canada while that application is being pended, right? A lot of these things are time oriented, and even like a day or two off, you're in a lot of trouble.
And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Peter, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, on Sonia's point there, for the eligibility requirements for a work permit, the program needs to be at least 8 months in duration to be eligible for the work permit, even if you are attending the designated learning institution. But as Sonia said, the program may need to be longer to give you a longer work permit if your points are not going to be high enough to be eligible under express entry or for your immigration here in Canada. So that's a very important point. You may not necessarily want to go for the shortest available study program. You may want to be in Canada longer to give you more opportunity to work here and develop Canadian work experience, which would then be reflected in the point allocation when you're applying for immigration here.
Yeah, keep in mind, everyone, like, it's not just because you came here and you're doing a 1-year program, you're not stuck to that. You can change your program. You can do more studies to make sure you put yourself on the right track. So if you're in a situation that you're already here or you already enrolled yourself, and now you're finding out, oh, I might be in a situation where my end goal may not be met, then figure it out now, because it's not over until it's kind of over, right? So you can still rectify issues and things that arise prior to the end.
Absolutely. The basic question that always comes to the forefront is, some of the people feel it's the constitutional right? That when something goes wrong, how are they supposed to be held liable? Whereas, I keep telling people, a mistake of fact of law does not work like this. You are supposed to know the law where you're going, and you cannot expect the Canadian government to assist you where you chose something to do through a person who was not registered to do so. All right, I'll come to the next aspect of this, the working side of things. A lot of students do ask us that, how do they know that they're allowed to work full time, or how do they know? Because I'm not talking about the students who would come from fairer backgrounds. I'm going to talk about people, who for the first time in their lives are going to move, right? And for them, comprehending the language barrier and understanding maybe the process is. I'll talk about the rural side of India, where people have aspirations. They're intelligent people, but for them it's a challenge. I mean, at all steps, and the amount of exposure they have is still limited, right? I'm going to put the facts out there. So some of them do get in, but they don't really know. Like somebody was asking me, my whole idea of doing this is so I can work full time on a on a student visa. Whereas there is this co-op program which the Canadian government has, or the colleges have, with limited courses that are open and closed work permits. Could you throw some light also on those, that what can a student look at, and what are these options that they have?
Certainly. So I can perhaps jump in there. The IRCC Canadian government website is very, very, it's not always the simplest, but there is clear information with respect to what you can and can't do. So I would just advise listeners, number one, to, as Sonia said, do your research. The IRCC website has this information. Students in Canada can work up to 20 hours during the semester, and then during regularly scheduled breaks, they can work full time. So I would recommend the website and contacting a representative that you are confident is aware of the rules. So of course, we are always happy to assist, but there are a lot of intricacies, and making sure that you know what you're getting into before you start applying to schools and applying for study permits from IRCC is so important, to make sure that you are not making mistakes now that could hurt your future.
Absolutely. Because this is an issue, and it's a huge issue. Sometimes students are working overtime. That's another point I wanted to bring out. Somebody's working as a lorry driver, somebody's working in restaurants, somebody's working somewhere. These are the type of things as part-time, work stuff that you can do, actually, because you cannot have full-time employment, professionally employed anywhere. But I've had a situation where, even people with a master's background have done such kind of stuff, breaking these timelines and then pleading ignorance. And, then claiming the human rights concept, saying that under HNC, please grant us this temporary reprieval from the violation we've done. What do you have to say about that, Peter?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. We do see that, unfortunately, not infrequently.
Right.
Students who are here, they are working more than the number of hours. They're going, perhaps they're not on payroll, but they're receiving cash informally. I would really emphasize that you've successfully applied for your study permit at that point, and you're now jeopardizing the rest of the immigration process here in Canada. So it can, if this comes to light with IRCC, you will not only be denied the postgraduate work permit and your ability to work here in Canada, but that will also likely mean you're not going to be eligible for your immigration. So the consequences are very significant. The recommendation is always to be aware and to seek counsel that can advise you on these potential pitfalls that could really, really hurt you in the future.
Right. So, I feel major chunk of the people would understand this, but still, guys, a professional advice, to all my listeners out there, a professional advice is something you should always seek before proceeding with immigration matters, because ultimately getting banned from a country or having a negative outcome on your passport can also ban you in other countries where you would possibly think of moving, in future. Why to stop your immigration there? So, a question next to you. What would you have to say about the 2021 forecast of, student immigration in terms of the chunk of people? You have literally 100,000 students, at least from India, applying, right? And their only, again, issue is that we apply to actually move to Canada and work and be there and do everything. Rather, we are stuck in India, when they collect all this money and they want to be there. So what do you have to say to them? Like, I think why I'm raising this, because, what they also fear is, will they be eligible for a work permit? Will this count, this study count? So what do you have to say on that?
I mean, patience is key. Okay. So everybody is going through it. It's not just the Indians. It's a lot going on in the world. Immigration is going to take into consideration a lot of these things, right? there was announcements that even if you had to study an X amount in Canada before you'd be eligible for a postgraduate work permit. Now it's like your entire study could be overseas given the circumstances, and you are still eligible for a postgraduate work permit, right? Keep in mind, these are your long-term goals. Sometimes we have to make short-term sacrifices to reach a long-term goal, right? And we're investing. It's a lot of money. We're investing into our future, like working extra hours. Keep in mind, is that going to reach my long-term goal, or am I going to jeopardize it for a couple $100 extra a month, right? And when you're applying for study permits, take into the cost of living, the tuition. Are we able to afford it? If we're not, maybe we need to work another year in India before we do the leap of over to Canada, right? These are all things everybody has to take into consideration, but patience is always key. Biggest thing in our communities, I'm Indian, I know patience is not our virtue. We like to get things done and be like, okay, no, it needs to happen now. I applied, I approved, I need to go, right? But if you just take a step back, do everything properly, it will all pay off in the end. For like example, like we all like want to do a study permit, and there's a lot of things, and Peter probably can even speak to this, and I see it a lot when we're doing PR files, is the study permits, a lot of things are done incorrectly or purposely done incorrectly because they think, oh, they're not going to get a study permit if they show that they didn't go to school for a year. Now we're just going to fill in a fake school to say, hey, the agent said fill in a fake school or employment, because that's the only way your study permit is going to get approved. Well, now you've just put a crack in your foundation. So when you're going to apply for PR, all these things are going to come to light. People don't disclose maybe criminal charges or convictions. Well, PR requires you to submit a police clearance. It's going to come to light, and that's when you're going to have the bigger issue. Now you've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on your tuition and education, and you can't even get PR, or it's going to be a huge hurdle. Now you're going to pay even more thousands of dollars to rectify an issue.
No, and rightly put by you. You know, patience is virtue, guys. It's, you know, I get this whole issue that I think India is being segregated by Canada, that they don't want to give us visas. Guys, I'm also stuck here, you know. I tell everybody, my application is with Green and Spiegel. You know, I have to move. But it's all about being patient, because globally we are hit by a pandemic. You can't expect things to change overnight. And you can't draw parallel comparisons with rest of the world, how it's working or what's happening, because these are matters where everything has to be processed to detail before an approval comes to you. So we are all praying, and we are all stuck with Green and Spiegel, and we'll hold them accountable in case my application does not come out to be true. Stephen, better watch out for this.
Look, honestly, throughout the world, it's not just Indian applications that are held. Every country, Canada has really only been processing a lot of files of, like, even with PR, that people are already in Canada with Canadian experience. They've opened up a lot of doors for people that are in Canada right now. So it's not an Indian problem. It's a worldwide problem.
It's a worldwide problem. So guys, please, she's reiterating it again. Peter's retweeted again. Treat it as a global problem, not your personal problem. Like how I am dealing with it and my wife is. Okay. Coming next to the issue, guys, is about students in Canada, you know, who maybe worked as caregivers, who worked in different essential services, etc. And now, you know, these draws coming up. Students always feel like, I know of students who've done studies from there and came back to India because they had to look for something. But just because they're out of Canada now, and the Canadian experience class and people from within only Canada are able to apply, they're stuck. So can we see some light at the end of the door for even these guys who just moved out because of the pandemic, thinking that, you know, well, you know, things get better, we'll move back. What do you have to say about them? And then they had valid work permits, but sadly things didn't work out for them. And some stuck, as you know, with the SERB benefits and kept staying and carried on. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, Canada's given postgraduate work permit. It's called an open work policy extension. So it's for 18 months. Someone that was here on a postgraduate work permit and not able to get work experience, they can apply for this extension, which the deadline is coming up very soon, about at the end of this month. So if you're in that situation where you didn't get the Canadian work experience, but you had a postgraduate work permit, you need to apply for that policy consideration to get another 18 months on your work permit. So Canada is aware of these situations and issues, and they are trying to do what they can to rectify them. For people that have work experience and then they went back to India or wherever they are, you have 3 years in essence. You have to have 1 year of work experience in the last 3 years to qualify under CEC, Canadian Experience Class, no matter where you are sitting in the world. You don't have to be in Canada to submit or apply for a CEC application. So don't come under that false pretense that if you're not in Canada, you can't qualify for CEC. You just need 1 year of work experience in Canada.
Right, that's informative. I think most of the questions answered there because I can see a lot of people approaching me for that. In fact, I had another important question from you guys. Peter, maybe you can highlight this. And this is about legal proceedings. Now, let's get to the legal side of things. People who want to now proceed against situations. I'll talk about employers, to such students in Canada. I have an example of a certain bunch of students in British Columbia who, were on a work permit working in a restaurant, but they were not given essentially documents enough by the employer to just prove their experience, and the salary was paid in cash. So should students stick to this practice because they feel getting paid by check is hectic? Like if you get paid in cash, you have cash in hand and you can quickly work, but that's detrimental, I believe, towards the end when you have to prove your work history, etc., and you need salary slips and you need some kind of documentation from your employers, right? So what do you have to say to such students that avoid such practices, maybe because ultimately they want to claim this for their work permit or however? I mean, please enlighten us on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really advise on the tax and employment law issues, but
No.
from an immigration perspective,
Yes, yes.
I would really advise any students who have graduated, they're holding the postgraduate work permit, to make sure that the employer is legitimate, and that they are being paid properly, paying the proper taxes. When seeking and applying for immigration, we would typically include pay slips, and the employer would be or the applicant may be required to provide those pay slips. So if you're in a situation where there's doubt that the employer is going to be able to do that, question becomes, especially if immigration is your ultimate goal, why are you working for that employer?
Correct.
The postgraduate work permit is of limited duration. As Sonia mentioned, there was the extension, but this is a very rare circumstance. This doesn't happen all the time. So if you're not using your postgraduate work permit strategically and working in an occupation that is considered high skilled, that would be eligible for your immigration, you're going to lose that ability. And for you to then continue working in Canada, you're likely going to need to have the employer obtain this labor market impact assessment, an LMIE. Right. So it's very precious, the time that you have on a postgraduate work permit. I would strongly recommend you do your own research, and you also contact legal counsel to properly advise you on that key part of your process here in Canada, which could really make things go awry if you're not using that time properly.
And is there a way, because this is something that's of utmost importance, is there a remedy available to such students, wherein employers hold their immigration documents back, wherein they can write into the immigration bodies or maybe to customs or border patrol or you guys to seek legal intervention or any kind of immigration assistance to that effect?
It would really depend on the circumstances. We'd have to review the case in a lot of detail.
Right.
Speak with the applicants about the kind of correspondence they've had with the employer. We may be able to ask for an exemption or for some kind of leniency, but this is really not ideal, and it would be very case specific. And if we are asking for this, this leniency, it's going to complicate matters for you. It's going to cause inevitably delays in the processing at the very least. And then ultimately, if you're making this leniency request, the government can refuse it. You're going to be relying on the government's discretion almost certainly to allow this request. So it is really going to complicate things at the very least. Mm-hmm. So it's really not recommended that you take any of those actions. Do the research, as Sonia said. Be patient. If you don't find an employer right away, it's better to wait a little bit, find the proper employer, and make sure that you're on the right footing to proceed.
Yeah, sorry. And Amber, it's twofold. There's situations where people are working on cash, they're not filing their taxes, right. But then there's a situation where they are filing their taxes, they do have the pay stub, but the employer is
Correct.
not willing to give a reference letter. That's a very different
Correct,
situation,
correct.
and there are workarounds that we can help with for that. It's also asking for some leniency from the government. But if you've been filing your taxes, you have your T4s, you have your pay stubs, you're in a much better position than if you were working on cash and you don't have any of those things, right? So you're not dead in the water if the employer is not willing to give you a reference letter. There is workarounds, but if you're working on cash, then you're in a very different position.
Correct. So I think most of the students would love to get more knowledge on this. And out of context, I'll refer you guys to my friend Josh, then read in Spiegel. Josh, if you're listening live, I'm taking your name again. No. So guys, now I'll come to the Q&A part of things because we are half an hour down in the live. There are some questions we've got, and it'll be interesting to address them quickly so that we have last 10 minutes for further discussions if we have any. There is one question where it says, any tips on preparation for a student visa interview which you guys can give?
Well, the most important advice would be honest. As we've been stressing, you shouldn't be answering the questions trying to give information you think the officer wants. Okay, so
Right.
you want to be and if you're unaware of the answer to a question, to say that I'm not understanding the question or I'm not certain. You don't want to be providing information that you're not sure is correct. That is of the utmost importance. Obviously be aware of the documentation that was included in the application in full. I'll just draw attention to the application form question, which says, have you been denied any refusals? Or have you ever been charged, convicted, or arrested? You have to be answering those questions honestly. And the question about prior refusals specifically is not only refusals to Canada, but it's refusals to any country. And all of those refusals, any enforcement action must be listed. So spend the time properly filing the application. And then prior to the interview, you can retain counsel at that point to prepare you. But at the very least, you want to be making sure you know everything that was included in the application.
Correct. All right. That answers a lot of things. Another question that I have is, what are the necessary documents that visa officers usually check before providing approval? I would say so. What do you have to say about that, guys? Any light on that?
Every and all documents on the document checklist.
Yep.
Right? There's not one document they're going to pay more attention to. They're going to look at all in a full picture. And if there's holes in the documents, they're going to pick at them.
Correct. And there's another question which says, what to do when student visas get rejected? Don't apply again. That's my answer. Wait for some time.
So when an application is refused, there's three different options. One is you can apply to have the decision reconsidered.
Okay.
Officers do not have an obligation to reconsider the application, but that is an option that's on the table. The second option would be you can request what is called the GCMS notes, the officer's notes, which will give more detail as to why the application was refused. So this could be very important if you want to reapply in the future, because once you have the officer's detailed reasons, you can then better and more fully respond to any concerns that led to the initial refusal. The third possible option for you to take is you can proceed to federal court, the Federal Court of Canada, and have the application judicially reviewed. And what that entails is you're essentially trying to convince the judge in writing initially that the visa officer was unreasonable, that they weren't aware that there was an error in law or in fact. So, for example, if you included your prior evidence of your prior study experience, and the officer says, well, there's no prior study experience documentation, that would be a clear error, and you could proceed to federal court and try to make your case there. It's very the probability of success at federal court really turns on how strong the initial application that was submitted is. If it was a weak application and there were lots of documentation missing, there were lots of holes, and it's going to be very hard to win at federal court. Conversely, if you have a very strong application and there's really no other evidence that you could have provided, in your opinion, then the federal court option was likely the best of the options to see if you can overturn the decision and ultimately have the court order another officer review the application.
Hence, I would suggest all students that you make your application so strong that you don't have to go through this process, because it's going to cost you thousands of more dollars, more time, and save yourself that money and time so that you can get better at what you're doing instead of taking a shortcut. Peter, another question, since you raised an interesting point on this, sometimes, I've seen rejections, maybe generally amongst the crowd. It happens when people who've got 10, 12 years or 15 years of work ex, around the age of 40, they start applying for, studies. And sometimes they get rejections because the immigration authorities say, what are you trying to study at this age? And I've seen this not only in Canada, I've seen this across the globe in certain areas, except for some areas where, the justification is true. What do such people do? Because there are some genuine people as well. Like tomorrow, I might be looking at something like this when, I have accumulated certain amount of experience and I might just want to advance my knowledge on this. What do you have to suggest to that? And alternatively, you see this trend a lot of in UK, where people go to do their masters in law with, different universities after a point of time. So what do you have to say about this? And especially also with regards to Canada, of course, that's the main concern, that, people get rejected.
In these cases, it's really important when you're applying for your study permit to include a detailed and comprehensive study plan that helps the officer understand the change of course here. So, you've been working for a period of time, you've been out of school for, X number of years. Help the officer understand why you are now pursuing studies again generally, and why you now want to pursue this specific program in Canada, and why you can't do that wherever you currently are. So the importance of a study plan is always important, but particularly in the case of these individuals where you haven't been studying recently, the officer ultimately has to be persuaded that you are genuine. And has to understand why you're now doing whatever you wish to do in Canada.
Right, because that's a major concern for most of the people in senior hierarchy, where they say that, but mostly, Peter, another point on this was that, sometimes people try to be smart. They apply for visitor visas and then get enrolled into colleges by going there. And that's when the officers really catch you, because you really can't outsmart people who are doing this for a living, right? So I would suggest to all those people who don't get into colleges or don't have confirmed admission, not to travel on these visitor visas and try to do these outsmarting things, because I've had an experience with somebody who came to us and said, and it was for a different reason, not for any of the immigration related stuff. Otherwise, I would have recommended him to you guys, but he just came and said that we got rejected because I was going for a week or 10 days, and they said, well, you're coming here for immigration and trying to get into a college. So I would suggest to people that, if you're into your senior hierarchy in terms of work, do not try to do any of this. We have another question, which is pretty much simple, which says, what are the possible reasons for the rejection of a student visa? We've already addressed that. Can a student apply for a PR? If yes, what is the procedure for it? Okay.
So there's a lot of options to apply for PR. It depends on a case-to-case basis, like what's your work experience, what's your education, where did you do your education, where is your work experience from? So it really depends. Like there's the Canadian experience class, there's the federal skilled workers, there's PNP options. So, to address that question, we'd need a lot more information about the candidates, but it comes down to the candidate and where their work experience, their age, their education, their language ability, do they have family in Canada, all comes together to say, hey, what options do you have? There is a lot of options for PR, though.
Right. So you have multiple options, guys, and they're always there to enlighten you on this. Reach out to Green and Spiegel. All right. There's another question which says, what future does an Indian professionally trained teacher have in Canada? Okay, that's a little out of context, but again, I think you guys are the experts and you can highlight this as well.
To come directly, you have to qualify for a PR program. But if you teachers are accredited through provinces, so to be able to teach like say in Ontario, you have to be on the teachers board and approved. So you may want to go through those, contact the associations and see where your qualifications lie, how can you get a job, and so forth. But for PR purposes, it once again comes down to your age, your education, your language abilities, and so forth.
Just Sonia, I like to point out this because a lot of Indians, teaching section. I've always heard that they've moved as teachers now, and Alberta. I don't know. I've used to hear a lot about Alberta that it's inviting teachers, and suddenly I realized they're not. There's a whole procedure to it, right? You just can't go as a teacher and just
No.
start working anywhere you want, right? So just because you're teaching here. So what can you highlight this? Because I have a lot of listeners who are teachers as well, and they're looking to immigrate, and they ask me, I'm a kindergarten teacher, I'm a primary teacher, I'm a higher secondary teacher, and they're not college professors, right? So they're just teachers, I would say, with kindergarten and primary. Is it so easy? They have to go through the express entry process and the license.
Yeah, license. Any professional has to have to go
They
through
just
a
can't move
license.
there and get a job.
No, like even like lawyers, doctors, we all have to go through licensing. Like just like if I
Yes.
wanted to come to India and be a lawyer, I have to go through a certain licensing. Just because I'm a lawyer in Canada doesn't mean I'm a lawyer in India and understand the laws and how the policies and procedures work there. Same thing. Any professional has to be licensed. That it's license oriented would have to be licensed to work in Canada. It's not
Yes.
simply packing up your bags and coming. I mean, you may get express entry, you may get PR through that, but you can't just start teaching. Like you have to go through your licensing.
I think we may have lost Amber here.
No, I'm back again. This is
Yeah.
what's happening. There's a turbo lag. I'm back again, right?
Okay.
All right. So next question. Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
I think I'm getting shocks that I need to get my medical approved when to land with you guys. Then meet you up. My network keeps chewing in and out. All right. Okay. The next question is, how likely am I to encounter a fake immigration agent? That's quite obvious. A lot in India. And how can I know for sure if my agent is legit or not? All right, guys. You would be the best to answer, Sonia. Maybe you and then Peter can answer this pretty well.
Do your research, right? Canadian lawyers are on the Law Society webpage. You can search up my name. You can search up Peter's name. Will be listed on there. Our immigration consultants are also, they have a website where they are listed and their license numbers are listed. And if they're not there, they're not registered.
Right. So
I would just-
so how likely? Yeah, Peter, go ahead, please. Please go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say you have to make sure that the individual is properly trained and licensed and regulated in some way. Typically, there's a lot more training that lawyers receive, and there is, and we are more regulated in comparison to the consultants. And so you have to make sure that, or you want to ask yourself, who do you want assisting you? And that's a very, very important question when you're deciding whether you want to embark and start the procedure to come to Canada.
Right. And how likely are you going to encounter a fake immigration agent? Well, just about every minute you try to reach out to somebody who says he's going to send you abroad, especially in Asia. So guys, be very careful. Just check all the credentials. I can name 100 people. Let's not do it on the show. It's going to put us into a bad repute. But I can tell you, at least Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, and so forth, other parts of the country, there is an agent just sitting at the drop of a hat, willing to send you somewhere, but actually he's trying to make his own future. So be very, very careful that you do not engage with people who profess to be somebody they are not. All right.
Especially when you're talking to them, if they're telling you to do something fraudulent or just do something fake or get whatever document or we'll do it, then you need to just get up and run kind of thing.
The funniest one being that everyone is welcome to Canada. There is no restriction, right? This is the funniest that I've heard, because when I approached somebody, they told me, when the first time when I tried to do this on my own, I approached somebody and I wanted to have some info. And all of you listeners should listen to this. That guy just told me, sir, there is no dearth of people in Canada. All you need to do is just give me your resume and I will take you through. So it's not so easy, guys. It's really difficult. You need to fit in the program. There's no dearth of people anywhere in the world. You just have to be the right professional to get into this and meet the requirements. There is no such thing as empty bowls that need to be filled in with people, and no country is dying to do that, please. So be very, very careful of who and what you're trying to approach. All right, next question that I have: can I get a study visa after 6 years of study gap and having 6 years of work experience?
I think it all just depends on the circumstances. Why are you going back to school? We would need a lot more information. You're not necessarily precluded from applying, of course, but we would have to address all the questions that the officer would have in that particular case.
Correct. All right, next question. What happens if a student immigrant, before his 3-year stay ends, marries an international student who recently came to Canada for a 2-year PG course? Wow. All right.
So both, I'm assuming both are in Canada on some permit. But I mean, they get married. They're here on their own purpose, right? I mean, there's nothing to it. But we do have a lot of cases where there's someone here on a study permit, and that individual goes back to India and gets married, and now they want their spouse to come with them.
Right.
That has happened a lot, and you have to be careful. Like, make sure, obviously, don't be entering into marriage fraud cases, right? These marriages have to be genuine. Immigration officers do know; they're fully aware that these things happen. So you have to make sure when you submit your application that you fully portray how your relationship is genuine. But yeah, they can then come as with an open work permit if they're found to be genuine spouses of the study permit holder.
All right, so I think that answers. Yep, Peter, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Amber, just to add something really quickly. When the open spousal work permits are being filed, it's very important to include all of the details that are relevant and to do so honestly. Sometimes people are married and they're changing certain details about the timeline because they think that it's not in line with what immigration would require, and you don't want to get into any situation where you're fabricating or misrepresenting anything, because the officers, particularly, I'm seeing a lot of refusals in India for open spousal work permits, and people are being found to have misrepresented. And again, that's a very significant penalty. You do not want to be doing that.
Right. Yeah, it's your story. It's your love story. Like whatever is the truth is the truth, and it's easy explainable if it's the truth, right? When you start fabricating things, then it just doesn't start making sense down the road.
Yes, and the contact tracing that happens in COVID, that also happens to your marriage permit, because they will go all around trying to see what you've done and how you've gotten to that. So I would suggest keep your marriage documents in place. Do not lie under oath on any of this, because it happens a lot, and I understand what you guys are coming from. All right, the next question. What kind of a job can a student, immigrant in Canada get while studying? Right.
So there aren't any really restrictions, or your work accumulated as a student is not necessarily or likely not going to be included as far as your eligibility when you're applying for immigration. So you just want to make sure that you're not exceeding the number of hours, allowable hours per week, that you're not working full time. You want to make sure that you're, in other words, staying compliant with the conditions of your study permit. That's the most important. And then the focus as to what you should be what occupations you should be working in is more of a relevant question after you complete your graduation.
Perfect. All right. The next and the last question, which says, do different student immigration cases require vastly different strategies? All right. So what's the strategy, guys?
So I'm not sure if the question is asking about the immigration process, but as far as the study permit application process is concerned, every case is different. So we do know generally what immigration is looking for, but we have to cater the circumstances and individual facts for the case and make sure everything is in alignment, and staying consistent with prior applications that were perhaps submitted. So if there was perhaps a refusal in your past for Canada or another country, that has to be properly disclosed. We have to include a study plan, as I said, but that study plan has to be very specific to your circumstances. So it's all very case specific. I don't know, Sonia, if you want to. Sonia's already addressed the transition from student to immigration. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Sonia.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so what you study doesn't necessarily mean that's the type of job you have to do to qualify for PR. So, for example, you could have done like some theater course in Canada and then be working as an executive assistant, which is a skilled occupation, and you can still get PR. So it doesn't have to be in line with your studies. It just has to be a skilled job.
All right, this one's from my wife. Agents here in India push students to apply to colleges which may not be of top merit or may not be able to help the student secure a good job or a future in Canada. How can a student educate oneself? All right. Hasleen, you've nailed it there. I really like the question. All right, guys.
Well, I would just, most important we've already touched on is the fact whether or not the school is a designated learning institution. If the school is meeting the requirements and you are currently enrolled in a program that is eligible for a postgraduate work permit, you'd be eligible for the work permit. And then at that point, it would be up to you what kind of job that you're obtaining. And, you're going to have to do your research to see what kind of resources each school is going to be able to offer you in terms of a co-op, in terms of connections and the practical advice that they can give you to help find a job here in Canada.
Yes, because Peter and Sonia both, again, this is such an important point because as you say, the IRCC website is complex, but you've got to dig in. And as lawyers, we are in the habit of digging in, finding notifications, blah, 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 stuff to read about on, in terms of the nitty-gritties that we talk about. But when a student is looking up to the website, and I'm not saying that they're not well equipped to do so, but this is where the agents come in and exploit, right? Because people are in a hurry. They are not patient enough to realize to go through the procedure in detail. Maybe you can take a month to read up on something like this rather than just go to an agent and again fall flat. And trying to cut corners can get you into an issue where, again, these agents come in. And mostly I've seen this, that, people do apply for this. So again, I like you to highlight the co-op program once. Maybe if you could highlight for, our listeners that what the co-op stream is and who all can probably, from an immigration perspective, be eligible. If you could highlight that, because on IRCC website, of course, there's info, but a lot of students here are actually looking for programs where they can work full-time, and they don't understand the core program where the requirement of the study is also to have you working. Whereas they get into, random colleges to just meet the work permit requirements and then end up doing these overtimes and stuff like that. Maybe if you could just throw some light on it before we close.
Amber, I think it even comes further than that. A lot of people are just getting study permits for programs for whatever reason. They're not doing it from their passion or what they want.
Right.
And that's when you're going to get into trouble of securing a job for your future. Like if you're just like, for example, like if you're doing an early childhood educator, right? Do your research. Is that really, is that really what you want to do? Because you're not going to have the oomph to go secure a job or look for these jobs if that's not what you want to do. Then do the job market research. What is the job market forecast for an early childhood educator in Canada? When I graduated, am I graduating with 50,000 students that are all looking for jobs that there's only 10,000 jobs, right? So these are research and passions that the individual has to do. And as lawyers, we can't do that for them, right? But when it comes down to, hey, if I'm doing a co-op, if I'm doing a study stream and if it has a co-op program to it, great, that actually puts you out, networks you, but it comes down to each school, like what programs do they have, what co-op terms do they have in the programs, and if co-op is important to you, then first narrow down what type of education you want to do and then find co-op terms in those DIL schools.
Correct. That's really important because you must know what the agenda is and why you're going. And mostly I can tell you 50% of the time, people are just coming in to just get into Canada. That's the problem, right? And then the genuine people lose on to the opportunities which might be there because you're filling it in with such kind of people, So that's the end with questions, guys. I'm going to ask you one last question. It may be out of context. You can choose to refuse to comment on it. But, a lot of colleges have tie-ups globally, especially China, India, or maybe South America, or I would say Central Asia, where, these agents have these tie-ups with these colleges and they're sending in people on commission basis. Now, is that a lawful practice to do? I mean, this is out of context of you working in your professional capacity, but I would ask as lawyers, something like this, why do you have these agents? Why are there so many institutions which says that, we'll get you into these certain specific colleges, whereas it's a merit-based system wherein you submit your application based on a matrix where the college sees you qualify or you do not qualify. But again, these agents come into play when certain of these situations come in. I'm not saying it's largely into practice. All I'm saying is that there is definitely some of this happening because of which immigration is being flouted around the world. Isn't that correct?
Peter, I may pass this one to you.
Sure. So I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying your question is about these agents that are representing schools in Canada?
Correct.
In Canada,
and having that time. Yes.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of experience working with agents in those kind of situations. Most of the time, students are coming to us either for the first time applying for their permits, or they've previously applied using an agent, and there was some kind of issue, and then we're trying to resolve it at the second stage. So I can't really comment too much about the purpose and role of the agents. I'm not too familiar, to be honest. But we do have, as I said, unfortunately, we see clients who are in a situation that is worse. They're worse off than they otherwise would have been had they just come to us initially, or of course, if they had been honest on their initial application. So those would be my
because
comments.
Sonia, you would, I can understand what you're saying, but this is a challenge because there are so many educational centers here in India where these agents have tie up with universities, and you pay a certain sum, maybe $50,000-$60,000, and you're in. And you get admissions, you get your documents processed. And some of them do get rejected. They'll send you to all corners of the world. Whether you want to go to New Zealand, you want to go to Netherlands, they have a tie-up with the university on a commission basis. They work. Though I haven't experienced it firsthand, right? And so I wanted to know from you guys: have you come across such a situation? Because this is happening, and that is why these agents, you go sit with them. They're not professionally trained. They're doing it out of. For everybody out there, just by filing your own PR application and getting through it does not mean that you are qualified to assist people who might have certain challenges in their background in terms of their application. And so are these agents doing it because they're not professionally trained. They're looping on somebody to assist them with, right? Correct. So any comment on that, Sonia? Given the context of education sector being growing in the world, it's a money-making sector.
Look, if you can't get admission to school on your own, then you have to think about why do you need a middleman, and then speculate what is happening there, right? You should be able to get admissions to school on your own merits. You have the education or the background. So there really is no need for a middle agent. And why are you paying extra money for a middle agent? You got to have these questions in your mind and then raise these red flags. Like, why am I paying extra money for someone else to get me admission into a school? Is that going to affect me later down the road? Is there something else going on?
Correct. And with that, I think our questions are over. My questions are over. So guys, we're hitting the 1 hour limit, and thank you so much for being here. Last take from you guys in terms of 2021 forecast or 2022. What can all kinds of potential immigrants expect this year? Is it going to be more patience where they're growing old every year, or is it going to be some good news where people are saying, yay, we finally get to enter the country we wanted to enter? What do you have to say on that?
I would just say, everyone's hopeful that the pandemic is going to be behind us very soon. Everyone's hopeful that, things are going to go back to normal. Processing is going to speed up. And I would just say that, as we've touched on multiple times already, you want to make sure you're being patient. You are preparing a strong, honest application, and hopefully, as I said, in the next few weeks, things will start moving quicker again, and things will start getting back to normal.
Sonia, last comments from your side, and then we close this.
Yeah, just be patient.
Different than Peter. No patience. No.
Things are looking positive, right? Things are opening up. Like we have now today, as of today, the whole quarantine exemption. Things are looking positive. There's discussions of the U.S.-Canada border opening. We just have to wait and see, and just always keep in mind, it's not only us that are in this situation. The rest of the world is in the exact same situation. And if we work together and we keep our distances, get this virus under control, then things will open up faster, right? So we can do our part, get our vaccinations, and move forward.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, guys. It was so wonderful to have you. I hope we didn't bum you down with our questions and the kind of conversation. We look forward to having you more and more of these questions and interactions. Thank you so much for being with us. And it's always a pleasure chatting with the professionals from Green and Spiegel. So thank you, everybody, for being here. It was an honor to have you guys on the show again.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.